Imagine for a moment, you're back in the office, sat at your desk, working on your computer, and you look around. Rows of multicolored computer screens glow in front of your colleagues' faces as they click and clack away on the mice and keyboards. And then your screen goes black. So does your colleagues, and another colleague's, and another. Your computer tries desperately to repair your files, but no such luck. Then the ransom note finally appears. Oops, your important files are encrypted. Oops. While this may sound lifted from the movies, on the 27th of June 2017, 1 in 10 Ukrainian computers displayed this message from a threat known as NotPetya, with thousands more impacted in countries all across the globe. Every day for the past 10 years, encryption has been used by digital adversaries to lock our data away from us, holding it at ransom or to cause unrecoverable damage. These are the realities of ransomware. My name is Greg Iddon. I'm the strategist for Sophos' managed threat response team, where we watch over our customers and go head-to-head with adversaries attempting to breach their networks. Today, we're going to delve into this devastating threat that has overwhelmingly become the adversarial weapon of choice. There are two primary goals of any threat actor leveraging ransomware: extortion and/or destruction. The mathematics behind encryption ensures that once files are encrypted, they are only recoverable should you have the corresponding encryption key, or if you have a colossal supercomputer that's number crunching 24/7 for more time than you or I have left in our lives. The emergence of ransomware to extort was predicted and explored by two academics, Adam Young and Moti Young, in their seminal 1996 paper, Cryptovirology: Extortion-Based Security Threats and Countermeasures. While their term cryptovirus didn't stick, it's what we now call ransomware, their predictions were spot on, even so far as to predict the use of e-money, and that's not going to be invented for another 12 years, appearing under the name of Bitcoin. The use of cryptography by a virus resulted in a shift from the viruses of old that were just more a nuisance than a major threat, to weapons-grade munition in the context of information warfare. And when a threat actor has no interest in selling you that encryption key, you are left with a digital weapon of nothing but destruction. What you're looking at right now is a map of the submarine cables that cross our seas and oceans, connecting our countries together to form the internet. Across these cables flows the produce of our digital age: data. These maps, they closely resemble those of shipping lanes, where giant freighters cross the oceans laden with goods of the global supply chain. And why this is relevant, it's going to soon become pretty clear. On June 27th, 2017, according to both the US and UK governments, Sandworm, a military unit of the Russian Main Intelligence Directorate, or GRU, launched an attack upon the nation of Ukraine. The unit orchestrated a supply chain attack, targeting the developers of a widely used piece of software called MEDoc. MEDoc is used for filing taxes, and in the Ukraine, it's used by 90% of all businesses. By compromising the makers of MEDoc, Sandworm would be able to reach the majority of businesses throughout the Ukraine, and thus is the potency of a supply chain attack. An update for MEDoc was then pushed out by Sandworm to all users of the software. Unbeknownst to them, MEDoc had been modified to include a malicious payload. And like many of us do when an update is made available, people across the country clicked and installed the update. One of those thousands of businesses using MEDoc was Maersk. Maersk is one of the largest shipping companies on Earth, with their ships moving cargo across the planet for the global supply chain. It wouldn't be surprising that the screen you're looking at right now once sailed across the globe in one of Maersk's ships. And while Maersk is a Danish company, one of their hundreds of offices was in the Ukraine. And like most other companies in the Ukraine, they also ran MEDoc. So, on June 27th, a computer in their finance department pulled down the latest update. Look, supply chain attacks are not uncommon, but what made Sandworm's NotPetya payload so monumental was the sum of its parts. The first part we should discuss is Petya. NotPetya is, as the name dictates, not Petya. Petya was a ransomware family discovered in 2016, It was one that targeted Windows computers and would rapidly encrypt the computer's hard drive and render it completely unable to boot. Instead, a message is displayed with instructions on how to contact the authors and pay their ransom demands to get the encryption key you need to decrypt the hard drive. Sandworm took Petya, but they modified it. With no intention of collecting the ransom, it was tweaked so that it would be unable to revert its own changes. This was one-way encryption with the sole purpose of destruction and no ability to decrypt even if you are willing to pay them. Okay, so the second part's a little bit more complicated. In March 2017, the American National Security Agency warned Microsoft about vulnerabilities in their operating system, ones the NSA had been using for several years in secret to remotely take control of Windows systems. They had recently identified that a suite of their offensive tools had been stolen. A suite that included working exploits of these vulnerabilities, which they had named Eternal Blue and Eternal Romance. Microsoft quickly released patches, however, most organizations do not apply patches as soon as they are released. Change control with scheduled maintenance windows means that it could be months before many organizations would install those patches. Then, 1 month later, in April 2017, a group known as the Shadow Brokers leaked the stolen NSA exploits to the internet. They immediately armed every threat actor with some of the most dangerous digital weapons ever made. Then, again, 1 month later after that, in May 2017, a ransomware variant known as WannaCry successfully used these exploits to craft a worm that would spread from computer to computer to computer using these exploits and encrypting everything along its way, impacting an estimated 230,000 computers in 150 different countries. It's then no surprise that Sandworm took notice of the effectiveness of these exploits and decided to include them in NotPetya, enabling it to spread silently from computer to computer. The final part of the payload is Mimikatz. Mimikatz is a security tool, and it's used to extract usernames and passwords out of the memory of a Windows computer. Since some computers would be patched against Eternal Blue and Eternal Romance, NotPetya included Mimikatz. That meant it could steal usernames and passwords and then use them to log into other computers on the network and remotely deploy NotPetya to them. No exploit required, a great backup if someone's patched. And so, for Maersk and thousands of other organizations, this deadly combination was overwhelming. And so, from a single attack on ME-Doc and a computer updating in Maersk's Ukrainian office, NotPetya entered into their network, and it spread like wildfire, rapidly crossing the globe to other offices in their network, killing computer after computer after computer. The United States White House estimated the global damage caused by NotPetya to be in the region of $10 billion, making it one of the fastest and most catastrophic threats our industry has ever seen. If you found this interesting, I highly recommend Andy Greenberg's book Sandworm. He explores the depths of this story in a page-turning fashion that even your parents would enjoy. In an industry that is often intangible to most, Andy's book tells a human-centric story that poignantly illustrates the state of cyber warfare today. While destruction is often only the goal of a nation-state, extortion is the goal of the majority of cybercriminals who wield ransomware. It's easy to assume that most ransomware is just a file, it's an email attachment, a link you shouldn't click, and you can easily avoid it with good hygiene and just some common sense, but sadly that really is not the case. The message you see on your screen right now is one commonly left behind by a group known as Maze, a group that has made quite the name for themselves in the media the last year. Like many other groups of their kind, they run a website where you can contact them and negotiate their terms, but there's a twist. Maze are not unique, and they're just one of a constantly growing number of groups who deploy ransomware. Revel, Doppelpaymer, Egregor, Conti, Ryuk Darkside, Avedon, Mountlocker, Sekhmet, Klopp, Nempty, Ragnarlocker, Mespinoza, Netwalker, Suncrypt, Echo Lockbit, the list goes on. And like many of their counterparts, they do not rely on the old spray and pray tactics of the past, mass emailing ransomware and hoping someone clicks the wrong button. Instead, they automate the initial compromise of a network. One of the most successful tactics they've been using is to use bots to trawl the web and brute force passwords or use credentials from data breaches and use those to try and log into servers that haven't been properly protected. In most cases, In the vast majority of cases that my team's seeing, that's Windows servers running remote desktop. Once these tools successfully make their way in, they stop. They do nothing. Nothing malicious, at least, beyond establishing some kind of persistence. It's here that the maze operators take over, manually driving the rest of the attack. They use tools that your common pen tester would use to audit a company, and they use tools built into the operating system itself, like PowerShell. By conducting the rest of the attack manually, they're able to cautiously move through the network and identify important assets like servers, figure out where the backups are kept. They're able to adapt to the defenses that are in place, where a typical malicious payload would follow its instructions and, if caught, just fail. Then, at the perfect moment, often simultaneously across all the computers they've taken control of, they deploy ransomware for maximum impact. This mixture of automation and hands-on keyboard has proven exceptionally successful, with the vast majority of ransomware cases my team's seeing being of the ilk of Maze and Co. But a recent shift in the tactics of gangs like Maze is their shift to not only deliver ransomware, but to steal vast volumes of data and upload it to themselves. A hybrid of both ransomware and what is often now dubbed leakware. To further incentivize you paying their ransom, since many organizations can just recover their data from an offline backup, they add some social pressure. If you do not meet their demands within the next X number of hours or days, they will leak your data to the internet. Or, as we're seeing some groups do, they will auction your data off to the highest bidder. Here, you can see Maze's leak site. This is completely public, and it's where their victims are named and exposed. They share details on the volume of data they've stolen, the kinds of data, and so on, and they lay it bare to the world. And, if you don't pay them, a link to your data will soon appear on this page. These groups are not small time. Their leak sites have pages and pages and pages of victims, many whose confidential and private data has been dumped for anyone void of a moral compass to download and inspect. And then there's their demands. One incident handled by our rapid response team had the Maze Group demanding an astonishing $15 million in return for the victim's data. Look, this tale is actually worthy of a talk on its own, so I recommend you go check out the MTR Casebook series on Sophos News if you want to see the ins and outs of dealing with Maze head on. It's clear, though, that these groups do not work in isolation. We've observed Maze leveraging techniques pioneered by their peers, such as Ragnarlocker's novel VM technique. Basically, as security software is always on the lookout for malicious code, especially code that's going to encrypt files, they deploy a virtual machine to the victim's computer, and it's running a really old version of Windows XP. And so there, within the virtual machine on the victim's computer, they run their ransomware, and the security software is unable to look inside, can't see inside the virtual machine and see the code that it's running. The ransomware then connects to the host, connects as a file share, and then starts encrypting files. Pretty nasty. Additionally, Lawrence Abrams of Bleeping Computer wrote of leaks that the Maze Group had published on their website, but that data was not stolen by Maze. That data was stolen by their peers, and Maze were just publishing it. So it's easy to see why the media began to start calling Maze a cartel. At a minimum, these groups talk with one another, and they discuss tactics and enlist each other's help in achieving their goals. And then there was a new development. Given the coverage Maze got in the press, they recently shut down their site, and they posted this message you can see on the screen. I'll let you pause the video if you want to read this, but ultimately it portrays what, in my personal opinion, seems like a pretty paranoid individual that's deluded that their destructive actions on innocent victims is somehow just and an act for good. That in all of this, it is the Maze authors who are the good guys, demanding millions in dollars, and somehow that's incredibly helpful. I'll illustrate it this way. If my front door wasn't locked and you walked in and decided to steal my important documents, demanding the contents of my bank account to get them back, helping me learn I should lock my front door does not make you the good guy. Sadly, Maze are not unique. A huge number of these groups now work in this exact way. We use terms like ransomware and leakware, yet the threat is not the software they use as the terms seem to allude to, but the threat actors themselves, the human operators with hands-on keyboard manually driving these attacks. How did we even get here? Cybersecurity is a fast-moving field, with actors and their threats constantly evolving. I get the impression that many of us are still only just getting our heads around ransomware in its state in 2017 and shortly before. That's when the threat was just a piece of code, whereas today it is both the code and the human who executes it. Blackmailers, as ransomware was called back in the years between 1989 and 2005, were few and far between. There were a few notable examples, such as the AIDS Trojan, PGP Coder, Archivius, but the encryption they used was weak. It was poorly implemented. In most cases, security companies were able to reverse the damage they did, and very few had to pay the surprisingly small ransom demands of the blackmail authors. With the release of Metasploit in 2003, a new era was ushered in. The act of exploiting vulnerabilities in software was now trivial. No longer would an attacker need to figure out a way to trick a piece of software into doing their bidding. Ready-made exploits were only a simple command away. With exploitation now automated, we saw a rise in what the industry dubbed as exploit kits in 2006, with the likes of MPAC and WebAttacker. These were effectively some code that you would buy and build a website with, and when a victim was tricked into connecting to the website, it would automatically analyze their computer and identify a vulnerable browser version or a vulnerable browser plugin, something similar, and it would deploy a custom payload that would abuse that known vulnerability. The success of an attack launched from an exploit kit was far greater than by other means at the time, and in the years that followed, the majority of web-borne threats seen by organizations like ourselves stemmed from these exploit kits. However, monetization was always the biggest hurdle for cybercriminals, turning their efforts into cold hard cash. Some of the earliest and most successful forms of monetization was rogue security software, sometimes called fake AV or fake antivirus. Software that would impersonate a reputable security product, or it would brand itself as a legitimate security app such as Spy Sheriff, and then it would flag your system and say that you're riddled with imaginary, nasty malware. And if you would be so kind as to pay for their license, they'll clean up all that nastiness for you. It's just a scam. Along with fake AV was scareware and lockers. Scareware was malicious payloads, and it would show things like pornographic images, or it would threaten to delete your files every few minutes until you sent them a premium rate SMS to get a code to make it go away, or you sent them a money pack or some other form of money, and then they would send you a code to make it go away. Then there was lockers. Lockers merged the concept of scareware with software that would lock you out of your computer. Reviton, sometimes called police or the FBI virus, that was a really notable variant. Effectively, your computer would lock and you'd see this full screen message. It would be pretending to come from your local law enforcement agency. It would state you've done something incredibly illegal and you must immediately pay a fine or face immediate arrest. As Young and Young's paper on cryptovirology predicted, digital currency would usher in a new era of cybercrime. With Bitcoin's release in 2009, currency that required no identification finally came into existence and was quickly jumped on by cybercriminals. As the characters often said in the docudrama All the President's Men, follow the money. But with Bitcoin, authorities' ability to follow the money back to the criminals was now drastically impacted. Then, the same year as Bitcoin came into existence, tools like Shodan came online. Whereas Google indexes the websites on the internet, Shodan indexes the devices connected to the internet. And since then, it has made it easy for anyone to search for a list of computers with a specific network port open to the internet or a vulnerable web service running on it. Finding targets for attacks was now as easy as Googling. With exploit kits trivializing the art of exploitation, 2010 brought a number of incredibly simple tools to adversaries' disposal. Tools like Zorist, which made basic ransomware something you could create with just clicking a few buttons in a desktop app. Newer exploit kits emerged, like Black Hole, and they switched to a service model, crimeware as a service. They offered criminals the ability to rent access to a feature-rich web app, their exploit kit, to launch attacks from. There were optional add-ons that you could pay a bit extra for that would add various bits of functionality and malicious capability. It just took away the need for an adversary to have a clue about how to make or how to launch an attack on a victim. And then there were tools like Armitage that came onto the scene. Armitage turned the art of hacking into a pretty and graphical interface with menus and buttons to click. Gaining a foothold on devices, moving laterally from device to device, elevating privileges, taking advantage of vulnerabilities and exploiting them, the complexities of orchestrating an attack once you're on the inside of someone's network, it was just turned into something you could learn in an afternoon. It's really no surprise that ransomware emerged in full force from 2011 onwards. It was now easy to create with simple tools, it was easy to deliver with exploit kits, and it was easy to monetize with Bitcoin. The weaknesses that had previously existed in ransomware, in its crypto and its implementations, were quickly overcome, almost certainly due to the incentive to do so, given the easy money that would be able to be made from a successful ransomware attack. Exploit kits faced a problem, though. Between 2011 and 2016, browser plugins like Adobe Flash and Oracle Java fell into rapid decline. The success of exploit kits had shined a light on the problematic interfaces used by browser plugins and the vulnerabilities they introduced to computers. And with the rise of the iPhone and Steve Jobs' refusal to bring Flash to the iPhone, websites were turning away from using plugins to deliver rich web experiences to their users. According to Statista, 50% of all websites were using Flash for some element of their website back in 2011, but this had fallen to 10% in 2016, with its total demise due at the end of this year, 2020. The media also added their weight to this debate, such as Brian Barrett's famous piece, "Flash Must Die." Since then, exploit kits and attacks originating from exploit kits have plummeted and likely pushed criminals to start to drive more and more of their attacks by hand, rather than relying on automated systems to deliver their payloads. And, as we've already discussed, 2017 saw digital nukes in the form of the NSA leaks bundled with ransomware like WannaCry and NotPetya. The extortive and destructive power of ransomware was clear to all. Since then, we have witnessed a widespread shift of adversaries into the hybrid of automation and hands-on keyboard, what we often call automated active adversary. Automate getting in, manually take over, steal data, drop ransomware. How this adversarial playbook will evolve, we can only speculate. But as history has shown us, adversaries are quick to evolve and exploit emergent technologies and novel threat vectors. I want to leave you with a few final words to take on board. The first is that automated active adversaries, for the most part, do not target organizations or individuals specifically. They look for easy targets. They look for low-hanging fruit. They look for our mistakes, our misconfigured servers, our use of weak passwords, and punish us for these failings. We are all targets. We must not hide our heads in the sand thinking we're of no interest to hackers. If you're low-hanging, you're going to get picked. And finally, the use of the word ransomware often leads us to think that it's just some kind of nasty file, an email attachment, a click of a hyperlink that leads to ransomware. This may have been true in the years between 2011 and 2016, but more and more, we're seeing active adversaries drive hacks manually, with ransomware simply the final stage of their attack. They lurk inside networks, they spread far and wide, they steal and exfiltrate vast volumes of data long before they deliver their ransomware. So, when you next see a headline of organization hit by ransomware, read that as organization hacked and extorted. The threat is not just the software they use. The threat is the humans that are delivering it. If you enjoyed this talk, you can find many other great tales of ransomware in our Realities of Ransomware series and in my MTR Casebook series, as well as our Sophos Labs Uncut series and many, many others on Sophos News. You can also find our latest report on the state of ransomware, our international survey on organizations' experiences with ransomware, and our analysis of the results. All right, that's me. Stay safe out there.